And welcome back to my channel, where I'm going to quickly explain the optional class features provided by Tasha's Cauldron of Everything for the Ranger class. If you did not see the video where I explain what the optional class features are, I highly recommend watching that video before you watch this one, as it will cover the basics of what types of optional features there are and go over some of the terms I will use in this video. To help you out, I have provided a link to that video in the description below. The Ranger contains the most optional features of all classes covered thus far. It is gaining 4 optional replacement features, 3 options features that extend existing features, and 1 retraining feature. These changes introduce new spells, spellcasting foci, new fighting styles, and new options that replace the favorite enemy, natural explorer, primeval awareness, and hide in plain sight features. As a result, I expect this video may be a little longer than some of the others. In addition, a Dungeon Master should have no issues with the player taking any of these options in place of existing ones, as they only provide new choices for existing features. But it might still be worth checking with your Dungeon Master to see if they have any concerns. So let's begin to go over the new additions to existing features. The first optional feature your character can select is available at level 1, and it is called Favored Foe. It is a replacement feature for the existing Favored Enemy feature, and there are some significant changes that have been made. The first big change is that you no longer need to pre-select a favorite enemy. Instead, you simply mark a target your character has successfully hit during combat with a mystical bond that tags that enemy as your favorite enemy for 1 full minute. As long as your character is able to maintain concentration on the mark, and is within the 1 minute duration, your character can do extra damage to the target the first time they successfully hit it each turn. That means that if you are dual wielding 2 swords, for example, only your first strike will gain the benefit of this extra damage. Your second attack will not. And that also applies to the extra attack feature in the sense that your first attack and only your first attack will gain the benefit of the extra damage. Any subsequent attacks that you make during your turn do not. Initially, due to your character's lower levels, they will be able to do an extra 1d4 points of damage. But as your character increases in levels, it increases to 1d6 starting at level 6 and higher, and finally 1d8 for levels 14 and higher. Your character will only be able to use this feature a number of times equal to their proficiency bonus, but they will be able to recover all uses during a long rest. You do, however, lose the advantage rolls when attempting to track or recall information about your favorite enemy, as well as the loss of the extra language that your favorite enemy spoke, if it had one. So let's go ahead and add this to our actions page. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this into place. I'm going to create an empty powers group, and we want to throw this under the Ranger group. And as we can see, that is now here. But also, as you can see, there are no effects created when you create this entry. You want to do that by right-clicking anywhere along this line, select Add Action, and in this particular case, we have 2 options. We can simply go with this roll here to add damage, or we can add an effect. It doesn't really matter, so I will show you both options. First, I will show you how to add damage, and then I will show you how to add the effect. So I'm going to create, in advance, both of those entries. So the first option, and the simplest, is simply to be able to modify this damage roll here and simply create a new damage die. And we want to make sure that it is a 1d4 when you're at a starting level, but that does change to 1d6 later on, and eventually does become 1d8 when you hit level 14. Now this character is level 20, so I'm going to use the 1d8 in this particular case. So during a combat scenario, in order to make use of this, you're going to want to be very careful. First things first, you're going to want to make sure that you actually attack the target. And in this particular case, that is a hit. So I'm going to roll the damage. And then, because the implication is that I'm going to mark that as my enemy here, I'm going to roll this particular damage roll here. And that's sort of the restriction. You must mark it. Now, we're not taking that mark into effect just yet. We will get to that. However, this particular ranger, due to their level and due to their skills, happens to have a second attack that they can make use of. I'm going to use this offhand weapon. That is still a hit. I am simply going to roll the damage here, and the reason being is that you only get to use this once per turn. I have to wait until the next turn comes around before I can make use of this again, provided I hit the target. Now, that assumes that you're marking that particular target through the theater of the mind. You're not actually putting any flag associated with that particular target to indicate that that is your favorite foe. It's not always going to work, because sometimes you might unintentionally change your targets during combat, depending on if new targets came in. You might forget, and you might unintentionally roll that particular damage die. Well, that could be a problem. So here's what you want to do. You're going to want to make use of the second option, but the first one is still viable. You just have to remember a few steps. And the second option is going to require both a marker and an effect to work with that marker. So there are two options that we can make use of, and the first one is simply to modify this effect to do the following. I'm going to call this favorite foe, semicolon. It's going to be DMG 1d4 if you're not level 6, so anywhere between 1 through 5. Sorry, 1 through 5. If you're level 6 or higher, you use a 1d6, and if you're level, I believe it is 14 or higher, you do 1d8. So this character is level 20, so I'm going to put in the 1d8. And then I'm going to put in another semicolon and a bracket C, and that's a capital C, close bracket. And I'll explain why that's there in a minute. I'm going to set this to 1 minute. It's going to be on self, and it's going to expire on the next roll. And that's to cover any accidental double damage. To apply the effect, you hold down the Shift key before you select this effect, and then you click and drag that and drop it onto the adult dragon. But you'll notice the effect doesn't appear here. It appears down here. And that is because when you hold down the Shift key, you're setting a target, and you can see that reference here. Now what will happen is, let's say that we've already hit the dragon. All I have to do is roll the damage, and it will automatically roll that extra dice and then remove the effect. Well, that could be a small problem, because you're now putting yourself in a position where you could theoretically forget what your target was if you had multiple targets. Let's say you're going up against 15 orcs, and you selected one of those orcs as your favorite enemy or favorite foe. Well, how do you remember which one you selected? During combat, that's going to get a little bit confusing. Now, granted, this method does work. In addition to that, it takes care of the concentration portion of it. So if we do this again, we drag it and drop it into place. If for some reason we finish our turn without completing our attack, and we circle back down so that the dragon is going, or any other target is going, but the dragon's easier to hit you with, if your character takes damage, there's going to be a concentration roll, and you'll see that here in a second. That's what the C does. It forces a concentration roll. In this case, we maintained it. Now, when it comes back to the ranger's turn, so I'm going to set the ranger back up to be active, they make the attack, they hit, they scroll up here, they do damage. Obviously, the effect is there, and it goes away after that roll, so that when you do the damage with the second weapon, provided you hit, you don't do any additional damage. That would work, but it requires a little bit of playing around in order to get things going. I've got a better way. So instead of one effect, we're going to create two effects. And they're both just going to simply be effects. They're not going to be damage or anything like that. I'm going to set one up, and I'm going to label it with just simply favorite foe. I'm going to give it a semicolon, and in brackets, I'm going to put our concentration indicator and set this to be 1 minute. I'm going to leave everything else as is. This effect here, I'm also going to call it favorite foe, semicolon, but this time I'm going to use an if target or if tag custom favored foe. It has to match the spelling. Semicolon DMG 1d8 for the level of this particular character. If you're lower level, it'll be 1d4. If you're higher than level 6 but lower than level 14, it will be 1d6. And I'm going to leave everything else is. I'm going to set that as self, and I'm going to set that as on next roll. Now what I'm going to do is, without holding any other keys down, I'm not holding shift in any way, shape, or form, I'm going to drag this effect onto the dragon. I'm then simply going to click this. Now, if I do my damage, you'll see that it will still do the additional damage. Excellent. This doesn't go away. What this means is I now have a marker on this particular target to tell me that that is the one that I have set up as my favorite foe. Now, if the dragon's turn comes up, and I'm hoping this works this time, and I suffer an attack from that dragon that does damage, like this, you'll see that the effect will force a concentration check again. This time, my ranger failed, and the tag went away from the dragon. This means now that if I apply this effect to my character and then do a damage roll, it won't roll the additional die. So you can't accidentally do damage for something you no longer have marked or targeted. I think this is a better approach instead of this one. This one will work, as will this one. It all comes down to your preferences. But these are the two different types of ways to do it, and then within this type, there are two options that you have available to you. I prefer this second one. And if it happens to be that your target remains in place, or your concentration remains in place, when your turn comes around again, just 1 second here. There we go. One more. There we go. Then this is still in effect, so that when you do your first attack, you hit, and then you do your damage, the effect is there, and then it goes away. All you then have to do is remember to apply this effect before you attack with your first weapon of the turn. That's it. That's all you have to do. In addition to rolling your damage, obviously. But you do it before you roll your damage. You can't set this up to stick around, because if you happen to roll with your second weapon and you hit with that weapon and then do damage, if this effect is still around, it's going to apply the extra damage, which is not what you want. So you're still going to have to apply this as an extra step, but I think this works a little bit better because now it takes into account the concentration aspect of favored foe itself. We're not quite done setting up favored foe, however. We still need to set up its number of uses. In this particular case, it will be 6 because this character has a +6 to their proficiency bonus. And now that we've gone through and set that up, whenever we make use of one of these effects, we tick this off. And we keep doing so until we have no options left. When a long rest is executed by the Dungeon Master, it will return. And now we can go ahead and make use of it again. So let's move on to the next feature, which you also gain at level 1. And what your character gains is another optional replacement feature called Deft Explorer. And this replaces the Natural Explorer feature. In place of the terrain benefits your character gains with the Natural Explorer feature, your character will receive different benefits as they level up. The first benefit your character will gain is done at level 1, and it is called Canny. It allows you to choose one of your character's existing skill proficiencies and apply a double proficiency to it, thus allowing your character to gain double the proficiency bonus for any ability check that makes use of that particular skill. And all we do is we go to our skills page, and then we choose one of the ones that we're already proficient in, and I'm going to choose Perception here, and set that as double proficient. And you will see that it has happened by the fact that you now have 2 stars here, as opposed to just the 1. When your character reaches level 6, your character will gain the Roving benefit, which gives them an additional 5 feet of movement, as well as the means to climb and swim at speeds equal to your character's normal walking speeds. And to put that into place, all you have to do is modify your movement speed here. And you simply can go ahead and set up an additional movement speed. Where's our speed? Here it is. So that you have 5 additional feet, and that will bring you up to your current speed. It also means that you can now climb and swim at your normal speed. So you can climb and swim 40 feet before you run out of movement. At level 10, your character will gain the Tireless benefit, which gives them the means to add temporary hit points equal to 1d6 plus their Wisdom modifier in points, but are only able to use it a limited number of times equal to their proficiency bonus before needing a long rest. Additionally, if your character is exhausted, they will be able to decrease that exhaustion level each time they complete a short rest, which is a significant improvement because it usually requires a long rest. So for example, if your character happens to be suffering from 3 points of exhaustion, they could reduce that to 2 points when they complete a short rest. But to handle the 1d6 temporary hit points, we need to be able to add this to our Actions tab. So I'm going to drop this into place. Let's put it under the Ranger group. And that is here, Deft Explorer. I'm going to create a heal. And I'm going to modify that. And we want to make sure that it is a 1d6, if I'm not mistaken. 1d8, not 1d6. My apologies. It is 1d8. I had 1d6 written in my notes here. So let's drop a new dice into place. And then we want to make sure that we add in our Wisdom modifier to that. So we have 1d8 plus 5. And that's all you have to do to go through and set that up. But keep in mind, if you choose Deft Explorer, you will not be able to choose Natural Explorer. You cannot take both at the same time. You can only choose one of these features at the same time, and the same is applicable to Favored Enemy versus Favored Foe. There's one more thing that we have to do for Deft Explorer, and that is to configure how many times your character can use it that is equal to the number of proficiency points that your character has. In this particular case, we have 6. To do that, you set this to preparation and then simply put in a 6 next to the word daily here. Now when you go and actually see it in standard or in combat mode, you will see that we have pips here that you can actually tick. And when you make use of the actual feature, click a pip and it will go through and make sure and indicate that you've used it. And when it goes away, you now have to go through and complete a long rest for it to come back. Once your character reaches level 2, they will receive their first optional enhancement feature for the Fighting Styles feature. New fighting styles now become available to your character, specifically the Blind Fighting, Druidic Warrior, and Thrown Weapon fighting styles. These are in complement to the existing fighting styles your character can already choose from, but you still need to abide by the rules of how many fighting styles you can take. Meaning, if you've already chosen a fighting style, you won't be able to take any of these unless your character gets the means to select one later on, or you choose to retrain it via another feature that we will talk about later on. So let's quickly go over the new fighting styles. The first is called Blind Fighting, and it gives your character the means to limit disadvantage rolls when fighting while blind or in total darkness, and even see invisible characters. This style allows your character to essentially know where someone is within 10 feet of your character and attack them without a disadvantage roll. This, of course, only works if the target your character is attempting to hit did not succeed on a stealth check while they are invisible or not behind total cover. However, the best way to make use of this is to simply make use of the ADV button down here in the bottom left portion of the screen, or wherever you've decided to place this modifier's interface. But you should always check with your Dungeon Master, as they might indicate that in this case, the disadvantage roll still applies. So the best option for you is to simply mention to the Dungeon Master that your character has the blind fighting style and that they gain the removal of disadvantage under those conditions defined by the feature. But if they state, okay, ensure you're rolling with advantage, it would mean that they've already applied a disadvantage roll to your character. However, if they say just roll normally, then that means that you don't have to worry about taking off a disadvantage roll because they haven't applied it yet. You just generally roll as it is. However, if they say that's fine, but still ensure you have disadvantage checked before you roll, then you will know that you are attacking a target that seems to have entered full cover or the safety of a hidden stealth check. If, however, they have already applied the disadvantage roll to your character, they will just say, go ahead and roll as you normally would. So there's a bit of a clarity that might have to be done between please roll normally or please roll normally because they've applied the disadvantage to your character, but it's not being canceled out. The Druidic warrior fighting style allows your character to select 2 cantrips from the Druid's list of spells. When selected, they will function as normal ranger spells, or normal ranger cantrips. You might recall that a ranger doesn't generally get cantrips, as you can see here within the spell slots here. You would normally see the number of cantrips listed. Same with the level description. You generally would see something like number of cantrips available. You don't get that in the case of the ranger, hence why this feature is quite nice. The cantrip spellcasting ability will make use of your character's wisdom modifier, but you should not have to worry about this if you're utilizing Fantasy Grounds, because when you drop the cantrip into place, it will automatically update that spell to make use of that wisdom modifier if it's required. Additionally, each time your character levels, they can replace one cantrip selection with another from the Druid list, but this can only be done 1 cantrip per level. So to find those spells, all you really have to do is click on the Spells button. You want to change the source to be Druid, so scroll past all of the cleric ones, and then set the level to be equal to 0. You will also want to make sure that in addition to this list here, you double check any of the other tabs here just to make sure that there are no cantrips popping up there, but generally you're going to find most of them here. And then all you really have to do is select a cantrip, so let's say Mending for example, drop it into place, and I'll take Shillelagh as the other one, just for kicks. Now, at some point later on, if your character levels up and you want to replace Shillelagh, all you do is you delete that particular spell and drop the new one into place. And that's it. The final fighting style your character can select is called Thrown Weapon Fighting. It gives your character the means to both draw and throw the weapon in the exact same action as long as it has the thrown property. So there is a limitation as to what items your character can use in this particular scenario. So for example, if we take a look at the dart here, you'll see that it has a thrown property. This is what you're looking for. In addition, the thrown property will usually indicate the range that this item can be thrown. Up to 20 feet, you are most likely going to be able to roll without suffering disadvantage, but anywhere between 21 feet to 60 feet, you will want to throw that object with a disadvantage roll, unless you have a specific feat or skill that cancels out that capability or restriction. But something like the fragmentation grenade, for example, so let's look for grenade, doesn't have that thrown property, and this is because it requires the grenade launcher to be flung or launched. So you're going to want to be entirely cognizant of exactly what item it is that you're throwing and make sure that it has that thrown property. In addition, it also gives your character a +2 bonus to the damage rolls of any thrown weapon that has successfully managed to hit their target. So we're going to want to go ahead and set that up. So let's create a new fighting style. I don't think we have one for the ranger yet. No, we don't. So I'm going to drop fighting styles into place here, and I'm going to put this under the rangers grouping. I am then going to add a new effect. And it doesn't matter whether you use a damage effect here or whether you use an add effects. It really doesn't matter. I will show you both. So I'm going to create one of each type here. For the damage effect, you can simply do a +2, and it will most likely be a piercing. So piercing damage. Now when you roll damage, it will do 2 points of piercing damage. I like the second option, but that's just because I like having clarity in the ledger, if you will. So I'm going to call this Thrown Weapon. And style, just to be sure. If I could type, and then DMG 2. and it will be on self, and it will expire on the next action. This way, when you roll the damage, you make sure that the effect is in place, so you just click that, and then you roll your thrown damage, which I don't have any daggers here, in order to apply it. That way, when your character does throw that weapon, it will do the damage and then drop off. Technically, it doesn't necessarily need to go away. But what happens if you switch to your sword? Well, that's no longer a thrown weapon, so you don't want to be doing the +2 points of damage there. That's why you set it up to expire on the next roll. Also at level 2, your character now has a wider selection of ranger spells via the additional ranger spells feature. There are a total of 14 additional spells, which I believe makes it the largest haul of all of the classes I have covered thus far when it comes to the number of additional spells gained. But that might change when I get to the more advanced spellcasting classes, as they might gain more. The new additions are 2 first level, 5 second level, 4 third level, 2 fourth level, and 1 fifth level spells. These are in addition to any spell list your character has access to, including those from the player's handbook and any other supplement that adds new ranger spells, meaning you can choose from this list or from one of the others at the time that your character gains new spells. However, as per the spellcasting rules for a ranger, your character will lock these spells in at the time that you select them, and they can only be changed when your character levels up again. So to add a new spell, all you really have to do is choose one. Oops, I didn't want to click that. Choose one. Actually, Searing Smite looks interesting. Drop it into place, and it should show up under the level that you selected the spell from, and then just simply remove one of the other ones. And that's all you really have to do. The last optional feature gained at level 2 is called Spellcasting Focus, which addresses an issue I did not realize that the Ranger actually had. For some reason, the Ranger class never seemed to indicate what their spellcasting foci were. If you look at the player's handbook, there is no indication as to what they would use. This feature clarifies that, and it explicitly states that your character can use a druidic focus made from natural objects such as a sprig of mistletoe, wands or rods made of special woods, and things like that. But it requires the use of something provided by nature, not taken. And as a dungeon master, I'm going to pay very close attention to how a given character has acquired their spellcasting focus in this particular case because of that restriction. And if you look at the wording here, you will understand what I mean. So if I take a look here, a staff drawn whole from a living tree, it means that that tree gave that staff to you willingly. You've requested that tree to give you that staff. Other objects incorporating furs, fur, bones, teeth, etc., those would be from sacred animals that willingly gave their lives for you to be able to have one of those, or that you happened to come across that had already perished and it was there and available for you. It's not that you had a direct hand in destroying that creature to get it. So there really isn't much in the way of setup here, except maybe going in and adding a new item into your inventory, giving it a brief description, and then maybe modifying that and filling in details of that particular object. So in this particular case, I could choose to make use of this tooth from an alpha wolf as my spellcasting focus for this particular character, provided that tooth was granted willingly, or was discovered on a carcass that had already existed. So, at level 3, your character will gain access to the next replacement feature called Primal Awareness, which replaces the Primeval Awareness feature. This feature gives your character access to spells that you can cast without the need of using a spell slot, but as long as it is one of the following spells. Speak with Animals for level 3, Beast Sense at level 5, Speak with Plants at level 9, Locate Creature at level 13, and Commune with Nature at level 17. Take note of the levels that I've specified because those are your character's ranger levels. So if your character is multiclassing and will never be able to achieve level 17 in the ranger class, they won't be able to gain access to that spell. However, As an example, if at level 3 your character chose to cast Speak with Animals, they would not expend a spell slot to do so, but they would lose the means to cast it again until your character completed a long rest. So this means there is a usage tracking that we need to add in addition to the spell itself. So if I go ahead and I drop this into place, we're going to notice a little bit of a problem right off. The only thing you can do with a spell is to prepare it. You can't set that spell up to do anything other than that. But there is another option that we can make use of here. So what we want to do is we want to create a new powers group, and you should see an add power option at the bottom right of your character sheet under the actions tab. If you click that, temporarily give it a name of, actually permanently give it a name of Primal Awareness. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a new group. Even though we have a new spell here, we're going to get rid of that in a second. Now what we do is we drag each of these spells into this group at the time that we gain them. So that should, yep, okay. And now we can get rid of this one called New Spell, and it will keep the group. And because this character is level 20, I'm going to drag the others in here. Now, what you can do is you can set up a 1 daily use for each of these. And for all intents and purposes, they're going to act as if you had cast them once per day. So if I click that, Beast Sense now goes away. Now if I execute a long rest on the other side, this should have come back. Interesting. So it didn't come back because I had simply right-clicked on the character portrait and selected a long rest within the actual screen or options that popped up there. Whereas if I do this through the combat tracker and I do a long rest there, it comes back. So that is working the way that we want it to function. So each of these would get 1 use before you'd be able to take a long rest and get it back. So that is in fact working the way that is recommended. And this way, everything shows up here if you decided to take that power group, and then you just tag them as uses through the preparation window here for 1 daily use. And that'll make sure that everything's set up so that you have to complete that long rest in order to get them back. The next optional feature your character is going to gain access to will happen initially at level 4, but you will be able to make use of it again at levels 8, 12, 16, and 19. The feature is called Martial Versatility, and this is what I would classify as a retraining feature that I was mentioning earlier. This feature allows you to retrain your character's fighting style at any level where it is gaining the ability score improvement feature, which are the levels that I have indicated while introducing this feature. This allows you to change which fighting style your character is using at those levels, and it is in complement to your ability score improvement or feat selection, depending on which of those you have chosen. This means that you can choose both a new style, if you choose to select one, while also choosing either a feat or increasing an ability score. But there is nothing we have to do to go through and set this up, as it is strictly a retraining feature. The last optional feature your character gains access to happens at level 10 and is called Nature's Veil, and it is chosen in place of the Hide in Plain Sight feature. It gives your character a means to use a bonus action to become invisible, which hides your character as well as any equipment they have on or anything they are carrying. If you've ever watched the Predator movie, that's what I'm talking about. This effect remains in place until the start of your next turn, but it can only be used a number of times equal to your character's proficiency bonus before they will need to complete a long rest to regain its uses. So let's go ahead and add this to our Actions tab here, and it's going to fall under the Ranger group. Oops, not capital A. There we go. And this has a number of uses tracking, if you will. So we added Nature's Veil, that's down here. What we need to do is set up how many uses we have of this per day, depending on the proficiency bonus that your character has. So in this case, it's a +6 for this character. And that way, whenever we go through and use it, we just tick one of these off. And eventually, we will reach a point where it just simply drops off our character sheet. When a long rest is executed, it will return. In addition, we don't have to worry about setting up the effect because it is already there. I would, however, make a minor adjustment just simply out of convenience and to set that as self, because it's only going to be able to make you and you yourself invisible. When a long rest is executed, it will return. In addition, we don't have to go through and set up the effect, but there is one adjustment I recommend you make, and that is to change this from what it was initially set as targets to self, because it's only going to apply to your character. Other than that, that sets everything up for Nature's Veil. And finally, the last thing I want to go over is around the default retraining abilities that are available to the Ranger and how you and your character can make use of them. The class does have a retraining feature, but it only covers the fighting styles that your character has available to them. If you decide to change a skill proficiency or subclass, you will end up using the default rules provided by Tasha's Cauldron of Everything to handle those particular changes. Rather than repeat how that works in this video, I highly recommend watching the introduction video where I explain what optional class features are, because I've already gone over how those default processes work for retraining specific things within your character. Which brings us to our conclusion. While I was quite happy with the Ranger class as it was prior to these changes, I've gotten to like these options as it definitely enhances the Ranger in ways that allow for a bit more flexibility. There's now a large selection to choose from, and it brings the Ranger in line with the rest of the classes for their abilities and what one can do with their character. This ensures the Ranger remains viable in any campaign because you no longer are restricted in your selections or are permanently locked into them either, thus giving you a chance to evolve your character alongside your own evolution and playstyle as it changes over time. However, this does bring us to the end of this particular video. I want to thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.